And I think people manage their lives and their relationships in terms of waves, the visible things.
Okay.
And money is one of those. It's not that it's not important. It's super important and it could be powerful, but it's one wave. Parenting could be another, finance or in-laws, sex, employment, whatever, all these different waves that couples are trying to kind of splash down.
Mm-hmm.
But underneath that undertow, you're going to see the same dynamics no matter what the issue is.
Information presented on this program is believed to be factual and up-to-date, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Discussions and answers to questions do not involve the rendering of personalized investment advice, but are limited to the dissemination of general information. A professional advisor should be consulted before implementing any of the options presented. Encompass More Asset Management LLC is a registered investment advisor with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and only transacts business in states where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements.
Hey everybody, this is Carissa Bertrand. I'm here in the podcast studio today with David Jones from Secure Connections Counseling. Brandon is out of the office this week, so you just get to hear from me. I'm really excited to have David on the podcast today. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist.
That's right.
And we are going to be talking about finances in relationships. So
Perfect.
We'll just kind of jump right in. So, David, like I mentioned, we want to talk about finances and relationships and kind of understanding that behavioral background within a relationship around finances. Tell us just a little bit about your background and where you're coming to be able to speak on this.
Sure. So, I have a keen interest in this going back to my early days as a husband, first of all, but also in my undergraduate degree, I did a degree in marriage, family, and human development with a family financial resource management emphasis. I thought I wanted to do like financial planning. Mm-hmm. Life took me a little bit different direction, but I found early on the important role that money plays in marital communication, marital connection, and all kinds of things. So it's been an interest of mine, and I certainly see it in my clients today.
Well, wonderful. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say on that. So, I want to just kind of start with like some money mindsets within the relationship dynamics. How do you feel that individuals' money beliefs shape their behavior within their relationship?
Yeah, I think to maybe answer that, I'll give a little bit more background into my therapeutic philosophy.
Okay.
It comes from what's called attachment theory. Attachment theory is a theory originally about child development that tells us that we do better in our individual lives when we have securely attached relationships in our lives. So a child does better when they're securely attached to their parents. Mm-hmm. And we say the same thing. We see the same thing in adult love relationships when a husband and wife or marital partners, relational partners have security, they do better individually. So back to your question, when we look at the way children develop, if they're raised in a secure home, a secure environment, it really doesn't matter the dollars, the wealth, the lack of wealth, they just feel happy and free. But children who are raised with maybe insecurity when it comes to like financial insecurity and they have a lot of fear around it, that's going to drive their attitudes and their individuality. Maybe they were raised in a home where money should have been talked about a little bit more in terms of how to conserve it. And so they get into their adult love relationships and they have an abundance mindset, which is arguably good. Mm-hmm. But when you get those two mindsets together, the scarcity and the abundance mindset, that creates a lot of difficulty and a lot of back and forth in the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen that quite often when I meet with couples as we're going through their financial planning. And I like to understand some of that behavioral aspects that belongs with the planning side of it, because for me as a financial planner, if I am creating a plan just based off of the numbers, it could look fantastic on paper, but when it comes to actually implementing that plan, it may not work out at all because it doesn't really fit with how the clients are going to be able to take that and apply it to themselves. So we really have to try and integrate the behavior along with the math and the statistics and all of that type of thing, which is really quite interesting.
For sure. And I would add, in the psychological world, we look at things cognitively, behaviorally, emotionally, and so on. And I would add that there's so much more of an emotional component that drives the behavioral component. If you have fear about a financial future, like I've had plenty of couples who they even showed me their finances and they're doing fine on paper.
Yeah.
But because of a scarcity mindset and all the fear, that creates a lot of distress around things. I mean, it's not uncommon that you get a couple dynamic where one's a spender, one's a saver. Dave Ramsey calls it a nerd and a free spirit, I think. And you get that dynamic often and so that creates a lot of strife. And again, it's not about the dollars. It's not about the money at all. It's about the safety. It's about feeling valued. It's about what are your values. I used to teach at the university here, and I would tell my students in a family relationships class that in spite of everything you're going to learn with papers, with lectures, with tests or whatever, there are 4 key things that I want them to remember. And I can go through all 4 of those, but one of those was the importance of financial togetherness. And again, that's not about the dollars. That's about the symbol that money is. Money is such a symbol of power, secrecy, values, discretion, gender dynamics, and so on. And if couples can't get that down, they're going to have problems in other areas of their lives. But on the converse of that, if they can, they tend to do better in all kinds of areas because they get the symbolism behind it.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you walk clients through, or I guess how would you kind of help clients identify what those money beliefs are as far as like the abundance or the scarcity or the power dynamics, those types of things within a relationship, and then begin to align those together?
Yeah, sure. And so to start, most of the time when couples call to come in for therapy, number one thing they want to work on is communication. And sometimes that communication, absolutely. Sometimes that communication is about finances. Sometimes it's about children. Sometimes it's about in-laws. But really, of course, we'll help you communicate. We want to do that. But it goes so much deeper than that. It's really, what are we communicating about? Are we communicating to solve a problem? Well, people need to do that. But most of the time what couples need is they need to communicate about their connection. And if you have a relationship that is insecurely connected, where there's doubts and fears about each other, about whether or not the partner is going to show up for them, about whether or not they're too much or whether or not they're not enough, that's going to show up in all categories. So to answer your question, very rarely do I actually talk about finances. I use that as a content to get to the deeper root and the deeper cycle that they might be experiencing. A common gender dynamic is where you've got a husband who's the primary breadwinner. And it becomes an argument about how the money is being used and being spent from one way or another. But when you really look underneath that, you'll find that he is maybe feeling undervalued. And so then because of that, not in an act of rebellion, but in an act of protection, he might feel a little bit more hoarding of the money.
Yeah.
Or maybe you've got a lesser earning spouse, often a female partner, and maybe they're managing the finances and they're seeing what comes in and goes out, but they've got their higher earning partner that's saying, well, hey, we should have all kinds of money. I work really hard. And then they're going, but you're not looking at the numbers.
Yeah.
And so they're feeling like they have to manage everything in their life and kind of parentifies them in terms of their partner. They have to say no and give them an allowance and stuff like that. So it's less about the dollars than it is about the security that they might feel in their relationship and then the interactions that happen based on that security.
That is really interesting. I've always, I heard once, and I don't remember where I heard this originally, but it was essentially within any sort of relationship, it's the expectations. If those expectations don't match or align, then that really can create a big rift. And so that's something I always keep in mind. And especially when I'm working with clients too, is like, okay, what are their expectations and what are my expectations? And how can we get those to match or at least come to an understanding of what we're both looking for here? So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word align. I had that word in my notes because alignment or attunement or togetherness, they might be used synonymously. But you can throw any budgeting process at a couple, at a family. You can give them all the tools and all the whiz-bang and all the amazing things. But if they're not in alignment with each other, they're just simply not going to work.
Yeah.
And so they have to have a basic value set, a basic understanding discussion. And they might not necessarily even have to have the same values, but they have to understand each other's in order for it to work. Clearly, if they have the same values, it's going to be easier. But the biggest thing is, do we understand? Like if we have that spender and that saver mindset, do we really understand why that saver is, acting in the way they do, and is it rooted in their childhood attachments and their difficulty in their own family? Maybe they're in a second marriage, which in and of itself is an interesting case study, because you find remarriages find a lot more issues when it comes to finances. But if they're aligned, then they can work a budget.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about when you recognize that, or for these clients who recognize that they have these mismatched mindsets, how would you recommend that they go about trying to navigate that in a constructive manner so that they can become aligned together? What are some of those tools, or how do you, go about doing that within a relationship?
Sure. I think behaviorally, you talked a lot about behaviors a minute ago. A common behavioral pattern that you'll see in most relationships is where you'll have kind of what we call a pursuer-withdrawer dynamic, or a pursuer and a distancer dynamic is what it's often referred to, where you have one partner who's consistently trying to increase the communication, the connection in the relationship. And then you have another partner who's kind of not doing that. And it creates a really yucky cycle, because the pursuing partner pushes their partner away more, and they withdraw more, which causes the pursuing partner to try harder, and around we go, and we have this vicious cycle. And so I think understanding those behavioral patterns, understanding that they exist, is really kind of step one. We're in a cycle here that has become the enemy of our relationship. We're not enemies to each other. We might be mismatched in our behaviors, but at a core level, we still care about each other. We love each other. We want the best for each other and for our family. But then understanding the emotions, and especially the root attachment-based emotions that go behind those pursuers and withdrawers. Like I mentioned earlier, a withdrawer might have this fear that they're not being enough, that they're not enough for their partner. So when a pursuer approaches them, and maybe they want to talk about a budget, they want to talk about finances, they want to talk about savings, or saving for college for their kids, and then that withdrawer already has this kind of mindset that I'm not enough, well, they're going to hear that message through the lens of, I'm not enough.
I'm not doing enough.
I'm not doing enough. And so what do they kind of paradoxically do? They actually stop doing, and they go work harder and bring in more money, but then they feel unappreciated, or they're not feeling understood. But again, that emotional dynamic, the fear behind being enough or being too much might be another common way to look at it, especially from pursuers, is what's going to drive the money conversations more than anything. So just to summarize, I think step one, understanding the mismatch of the pursuer-withdrawer dynamic behaviorally, but what does that mean emotionally? As I'm scared that I'm too much for you and I'm not enough for you, and so then I act in this behavioral way. Understanding that dynamic is really helpful to understand, well, what is it that you're protecting? I'm afraid right now, and so I'm distancing myself, and I'm withdrawing, and I'm not engaging this conversation, and it looks like I don't care, but it actually means that I care so much that if I get this wrong, what are you going to think of me? And so that protection that comes up is really the most important piece of understanding the mismatch in behaviors.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, it did. And my mind just keeps running through all these different experiences that I've had over the years with different clients, and these interactions where the partners are mismatched within their expectations, or, and I'm thinking of, a couple specific situations where one person is really holding things close to the vest because they are afraid, and the other person's like, hey, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. We need to figure this out. Like, let's go sit down with the advisor. Let's work through these numbers. And the other person starts getting, defensive or upset or whatever. And then it pushes that other person away. And then it becomes I can't talk about this at all.
Right. And there's a complete shutdown.
And so
it's amazing you even get
anywhere.
Those people in the door sometimes.
Yeah.
Because they're already feeling it. So
yeah. So that's, I think that is a very common thing that people struggle within a relationship. So it's interesting for me to hear some of that, the backside of it, of where that's coming from. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how do we create that safe environment within a relationship to start talking about finances, or I guess really whatever it is, because again, you keep mentioning it's not about the dollars. It's not necessarily about the money, but how do you create a safe environment to have these more difficult conversations within a relationship?
Yeah, so there's a tool that we use in therapy, and it sounds really ooey gooey. It's called sharing about sharing.
Okay.
The more technical term is metacommunication, communicating about communicating. And so I think a starting point is not necessarily let's talk about finances. It's how do you feel about talking about finances? If and I don't know your situation, I know that if one of my clients were to come, I've seen this a bunch of times, I'll say it that way, is the couple comes and they want to talk about finances, and then, well, let's talk about it. And I see a little flinch in one of their partner's eyes. I'm like, okay, there's some fear there. There's some doubt. There's some worry. There's some panic going on. So let's stop talking about the money and let's talk about the emotions that are going on when you talk about the money. There's a phrase we use in therapy that if you name it, you tame it. If you can talk about the fear, if a person can be vulnerable and say, oh, conversations like this really scare me because it, brings up stuff from my childhood, or it brings up stuff from my early relationship, or it makes me doubt whether or not you can count on me. And so that fear causes me to freeze up, or that fear causes me to pursue more. I think that's probably the better place to start is let's talk about how you talk about money, not let's just talk about the money. We've always got to start. Again, if people have this basic security in their relationship underneath them, the budgets, the dollars, those are just logistical tools that can be taught to anybody, can be worked out with anyone. But if we don't have that initial safety about how we talk about our finances, you can look at a lot of situations. I mentioned earlier that it's a symbol of power. Maybe a partner came from a home where finance was where the money was ruled with an iron fist from dad or mom or the other. And so they find themselves feeling scared that if we bring up finances, that's going to bring up this anger that I saw in my early childhood. I'm staying away from that conversation. Or even the opposite of that is true. I saw my parents never talk about finances, and they were always broke, and we were always starving, and we were getting financial support from our family or from our faith or whatever. I don't want to be that person. So I'm out of that fear. I'm consistently trying to talk about finances. Well, let's talk about the fear for a minute first. Yeah. Mr. Rogers said, feelings that are mentionable are manageable. And I really like that idea that if you can talk about them, then they become less of the elephant in the room.
I like that. Feelings that are mentionable are manageable.
Good old Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, that's great. So do you have any specific tools or framework that couples might be able to utilize to start laying that foundation for this type of conversation so that they can start working through this at home? So
yeah, for sure. And communication tools and communication theory is there. You can find all kinds of tools available on YouTube or books or all kinds of things. And they're great tools. But I think it needs to start with having that emotional safety about the conversation first. And I just can't emphasize about that enough. And I think I'm repeating myself, but it's so important. I can teach, and I love to do it, by the way. I could teach couples communication skills all day long. I do it often. But if they're not communicating about the right things, it can lead to frustration. It can even lead to manipulation. They could use those communication tools against each other. But are we using the communication tools that we're given to connect with each other? Because if we connect with each other, we're on the same team, we're unstoppable. We're going to manage our financial goals. We're going to get out of debt. We're going to save for that vacation home because we're connected with each other and we're on the same team. So that's the foundation.
Okay.
In addition to that, there are always all kinds of communication tips and tricks. I mean, we talk about things like using I messages, speaking for I, speaking for me. I feel scared when I look at the bank account and it's, only have so much in it, rather than why is the bank account so low? That's a great way. Yeah,
the emotion behind that feels very different.
Exactly. And I mean, the research is very clear that if you start a conversation with a you message, it puts people on the defense right away.
Yeah.
So if we turn that to I feel this, then I can't guarantee it won't put the other person on the defense, but it decreases the likelihood. Yeah. Another tool that I really like when it comes to talking about finances is to be inquisitive rather than accusatory. To inquire about what's before us. Hey, what's going on here? And we're going to externalize this problem as the thing in front of us, rather than you messed up and you keep shopping and why are these Amazon boxes showing up and how many credit cards did you get last year? It goes along with the I messages and the you messages. So I think those are good talking skills that can really help. But when it comes down to it, I think most couples need to be better at their listening skills. Listening really is the crux of it all. If I have a safe partner, if I have somebody who's going to listen to me, if I have somebody who's going to hear me out, I can speak. I can get the words out. It's when I don't feel I have that I'm going to stumble and I'm not going to get them out right. So really focusing on good listening skills, which involves things like repeating back what your partner has said. This is what I heard you say. Let me make sure I got it. And then maybe validating their perspective. I can see why you would be scared about finances given the way you grew up. I totally get it. Rather than just reassuring. Reassuring actually is kind of a bad tool sometimes.
Interesting.
It's not a bad tool. It's just mistimed.
Okay.
I want to validate somebody's perspective first and then reassure them. I can see why you would be scared about your finances given the way that you broke up or the way you grew up and were raised. But I want to reassure you that we're a different couple. We're not like your parents. If I just try and reassure somebody without validating where they are, it goes right over their head.
Yeah.
It doesn't really offer a lot of security in most cases. But also empathizing with them. Yeah, this is really scary for you. I understand why you would feel this way given what you had in your first marriage or how we acted in our early marriage even. So really the combination of those good speaking skills and the good listening skills is a great way to go. But I think we need to emphasize our listening skills more because we learned it from our parents who probably weren't the best listeners.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic call out because I think we can all improve our listening skills. I think the last thing that I want to talk about today, and then I'll open it up to you as well in case there's anything else that I haven't thought of that, we need to make sure to get out today. But I'd like to address some of the most common communication pitfalls when it comes to money and talking about like that secrecy, the avoidance, the power struggles. We've talked about that a little bit, but can you talk about how those come up in relationships around money? Maybe give us an example and how to work through that.
Yeah, so just to give you a little bit of context, my major focus in my practice is not working specifically with money, it's working with infidelity. And that form of betrayal is one of the most difficult forms of betrayal that somebody can work with. But I've worked with plenty of clients who, because of financial infidelity, we might call it, where they were being secretive, they might have accounts that their partner didn't open, that they opened up that their partner didn't even know about, or they're shifting money around, or they're not letting partners have access to accounts and things like that. That sort of financial infidelity is a significant form of betrayal. So it erodes trust. It adds to the fear. So I think those are the nefarious areas that clearly are inappropriate and are going to cause a lot of problems. Yeah. I think probably more common is less like malice, less nefarious activities, and more just like negligence.
Okay.
If there is a problem, it's just kind of not really understanding how to let my partner and be involved. I'm not trying to be malicious. I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes, but I'm also just kind of keeping you at bay a little bit.
Maybe more of the avoidance.
Exactly. Yeah. In that avoidant category. So you use the word avoidant. Going back to attachment theory, one of the insecure attachment styles is an insecure avoidant. And that's a person or a child that doesn't put a lot of stock or trust in their relationship, so they don't enter into the relationship communicatively and with financial discussions and so on, because again, they're operating on a fear that they're going to be rejected or that their partner's not going to accept them. What comes to mind just this moment was a couple that I was working with, and the male partner ran a small business and it wasn't going well. And so he would hide money, again, not with the same nefarious, like a power struggle type thing, or not trying to pull the wool over, but just out of his own fear and his own protection. He would hide money issues, or he'd put money over here so that it looked like it was better than it was here. And then, they were behind on their taxes years and years and stuff, but he would tell his partner that everything was going to be okay. But again, that was that avoidance.
And that fear of not being enough, like you'd mentioned before. Yeah.
And so getting to the bottom of that, I haven't even mentioned that I practice a form of therapy called emotionally focused therapy that is based off of that pursuer-withdrawer dynamic and that insecure anxious partner and the insecure avoidant partner. And so using emotionally focused therapy, getting to the emotional root of things, of why people have those behaviors, is a very successful tool. And it's going to be true when it comes to money, marital infidelity, parenting, in-laws, sex. You're going to have the same kind of dynamic underneath all of those different categories.
Can you explain a little bit about what that therapy is like?
Sure.
Because I'm not familiar with that.
Sure.
So
in emotionally focused therapy, the therapist is going to listen to what's happening in the couple's cycle. Again, it's going to be a version of that pursuer-withdrawer cycle. And that pursuer-withdrawer cycle can be contextual to maybe in the money discussions, you got one who's a pursuer and one's a withdrawer. But then when it comes to sex, you've got one who's a pursuer and withdrawer, and they might be opposite of each other. That part doesn't really matter so much. It's just what's happening in the moment. So if I hear a couple talking about money and I see one of the partners shutting down, so that's my cue to slow it down, go really slow, soften my voice, and go to that withdrawn partner and say, hey, can you let me in? What's going on for you right now? I noticed that you flinched as soon as we started talking about money. Can I just check in with you? Because usually they're going so fast with each other that there's no space for those emotions. And so the role of the therapist is to slow it down, get to the emotional root of that.
Calling attention to those feelings.
Calling it out and letting them feel.
Okay.
And then especially seeing if they can share it with their partner. Because you've got this pursuing, withdrawing situation. You've got a wife who's pursuing the husband to let's talk about the budget, and I see him shutting down, and I get to the emotional fear, and he says, I'm scared. He says to her, I'm scared that you're going to think less of me, and I just can't stand a world where you would think less of me. I think so highly of you. Well, that sends such a powerful message to her because she thinks he doesn't care.
Yeah.
But in fact, he cares so much that that's why he does the things that he does. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
It's very powerful. It's the most validated research couples therapy that exists, and it's my favorite mode of therapy. I'm certified in it. All of my practitioners in my practice are trained in it. It's really powerful stuff.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
I'll send you the therapy bill.
Okay. Yeah, I could use that. So can you just kind of give us a quick recap, I guess, or... Well, before we even get to that, is there anything else that you want to make sure to share with us today about, talking through in a relationship about finances or these deep conversations, making sure that there's that safe connection?
Sure. I like metaphors. I hope this one makes sense, is that I imagine you've been to the ocean before. You see waves.
Yeah.
Waves are cool. They're fun. You can play in them. They're also kind of dangerous. If they're big enough, you could get hurt. But arguably the most important, the most dangerous part of the ocean is the undertow. Yeah. That current of water that if you get sucked in that, you're pulled out and you're drowning. And I think people manage their lives and their relationships in terms of waves, the visible things. Okay. And money is one of those. It's not that it's not important. It's super important and it could be powerful, but it's one wave. Parenting could be another, finance or in-laws, sex, employment, whatever, all these different waves that couples are trying to kind of splash down. But underneath that undertow, you're going to see the same dynamics no matter what the issue is. You're going to see this, again, this cycle that they find themselves in, these emotions that they're rooted in, these perceptions and views of self of not being enough or being too much for my partner, not being accepted, not having a sense of safety. You're going to see that in just about every one of those conversations. So again, I just can't emphasize enough that it's not about the money. Yeah. It's about the cycle that couples find themselves in that is emotionally driven. If we can tackle that, if we can get security and safety around that, your job is easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start sending clients your way.
Please do.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. Could you give us just a quick recap of the most important things that we can do to help improve our communication within our relationships?
Yeah, just recognize that communication, and I really think that sharing in that meta communication process is one of the most important things. Is not necessarily, are we going to talk about money right now? Let's talk about how we feel when we talk about money. Okay. Because when we can get to the bottom of that and we can connect, then the money conversations, even if the numbers are horrendous, even if there's a lot to be said and there's a lot of debt and there's not enough money at the end of the month and we really have to make some big decisions, man, if I've got my partner, if I've got her with me and we're just doing this together, we're going to figure those things out. It's when we have to do it alone, when we feel like we're doing it alone. And maybe you got two people who feel like they're doing it alone, which is the bigger tragedy of it all, because you got two people and they want to be with each other. It's just a cycle that's going on between them. If we can talk about our emotions and how we feel about talking about money first, that's going to set up a better platform for the actual dollars and cents.
I love that. And I just want to remind anybody who's listening to this about the communication skills that you mentioned of the I messages, trying to put that on yourself rather than saying the you or things like that. And
to be inquisitive rather than accusatory.
Yes, inquisitive rather than accusatory. I think that's super fantastic. And then the reminder that we all need is to be a better listener. Instead of trying to be so focused on what we're saying and how we're saying it necessarily, even with those I messages, but to try to be quiet, sit, listen, be an active listener, and participate in that conversation
for sure.
through listening.
Yeah, Stephen Covey had it right with one of his 7 habits is to seek first to understand, then to be understood. It's a very powerful process that can manage my financial discussions or just about any other discussions.
Well, thank you so much, David, for this information. I think this is super valuable. I've learned a lot today. If anybody that's listening to the podcast today wants to reach out to you or find you and your team, can you share with us how they can find you?
Sure. The name of the practice is Secure Connection Counseling, and they can just go to secureconnectioncounseling.com and they can learn about us, our therapy models. And they can even read about my dog. His name is Bowlby. He was named after John Bowlby, who was the father of attachment theory. He's kind of the mascot of our practice. We're proud of him almost as much as anything.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much again, David. Appreciate you coming on today.
Okay, thank you. It's been a pleasure.